Hi everyone, Stephen here at Teach Me Music, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 funk bass lines. So this is my top 5, obviously personal preference. Drop it in the comments to tell us what your top 5 would be. And just to kind of outline a few things, we're talking about funk bass lines. So funk is usually based around minor keys. It uses very special scales or modes from the Dorian or Mixolydian. Very big words. It's cool if you don't know it, because I'm just going to be showing you the bass lines anyway. But it's just to give you a bit of information, a bit of insight into what funk bass lines and funk music is. So funk is very rhythmic. It's actually more important to get the rhythm rather than the notes. And once you've got the rhythm, and obviously the bass line is important as well, because if you play the wrong notes, it's going to sound wrong. But when you've got the rhythm locked in super tight with the kick and the drummer, you're just going to loop that round 99% of the time because it creates the groove. And the groove is the most important thing in terms of funk. So these top 5 funk bass lines are all about the groove. They're not hard to play, or they're not super difficult to play anyway. And the idea is they're just going to give you that funk edge, and you can steal a few things from them, and I'll tell you what you can steal from each bass line as we go. So don't worry if you don't know those big fancy words, Dorian, Mixolydian. There's going to be videos coming up where we'll explain all of this stuff anyway. So, it's all good. The first one that we're going to play today is Long Train Running by the Doobie Brothers. And it's just because it's got a really killer bass introduction, and it's got a really killer bass line. And the best thing about it is it's based on a pattern. So once you know the pattern on the fretboard, you can move it around as the chords change. Really, really super important for funk. So this is the intro bass line, and then I'll show you the actual funk bass line for the rest of the song. So the intro sounds like this. And it's all about trying to get that bounce. Try and keep the notes really, really short. And if you know a fancy word for short, it is staccato. So we're going to be playing quite a lot of bass line staccato in this video because it is very funky. It's very bouncy, gets the shoulders moving, and gets everyone on the dance floor, which is what funk's made for. Funk is a dance style of music, so if the people aren't dancing, you're playing something wrong. Hate to break it to you, just the way it is. So I hate to break it to you, that's just the general kind of consensus. If people aren't dancing when you're playing the bass lines, it's just something that you're doing. The rhythm's not quite right, or you're just not quite locking in. So just double check the dance floor, especially if you're gigging. Always important. So obviously this is based around this area of the bass, so the frets are a bit closer. And we're starting from 8. I'm not actually going to show you how to play every individual bass line. It's just so you get a general gist of what's going on. So it's just really shape-based or pattern-based. You're basically playing that shape a lot of the time. So that's the intro. The actual bass line where everything starts to kind of kick in and the whole song starts, in terms of the singing, in terms of the verse, and the main bulk of the song, we're down here. So funk tends to use quite a lot of low notes and quite a lot of high notes because it gives that contrast, which gives it that bounce. So we're going to start really low, and then we're going to slowly go down the strings to give it that funk flavor. And you might even hear, if you're very, very clued up and you've got really good hearing, I'm putting a few mutes in there. So that is actually really important for funk bass lines as well. Some of the other ones we've got coming up in a second have mutes in them. And the mute, even though it sometimes is difficult to hear it, it just gives it that slight flavor, that slight flair, and it makes you sound like a better funk bass player. And that's what these 5 bass lines are designed to do. So this one is quite a simple funk bass line, but it's got a nice shape around here. So you're basically playing the 3, the 3, and the 5. So the 3rd fret and the 5th fret. And you don't have to play a million notes to make it bouncy and to make it groove. That's a really important thing as well. Sometimes in funk, it's better to play less notes and to just lock on with the rhythm. So that's our first bass line. That was Long Train Running by the Doobie Brothers. Our second bass line is going to be Super Freak by Rick James, and it's because it's sampled so much. And what I mean by sampled is it's basically used in other styles of music and other artists have used it, but it's still the same bass line. They've just taken it, sampled it, and dropped it into a different song. The easiest ones to know and the easiest ones to kind of hear is Under Pressure by Queen, which isn't a funk song, but obviously sounds like this. But then it's also Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice. So same bass line in two different songs, but obviously it is the same. Queen came up with it first, and then Vanilla Ice sampled it, so that's what a sample is. But this is Super Freak by Rick James, and it sounds like this. So this one teaches you the importance of being legato, long notes, and staccato, short notes. So the first couple of notes are legato because they're really, really held, they're very long. There isn't much of a gap between the notes. So da 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 da. But then as soon as you hit the open A string, we're going to mute it or stop it from ringing to turn it into staccato, which gives this really long and then short kind of feel. So long notes feel really heavy, and then short notes feel really, really quick. So it gives it that kind of like bop in your head kind of groove back and forth. So obviously playing it a few more times, sounds like this. And if you're playing those bass lines, if you're not grooving, moving your head, moving your shoulders, or tapping your foot, you're probably like just not locking into the groove, because these are so cool that your body is probably going to want to move in some way, shape, or form. And we are bass players, so we should be locking in, should be grooving, and just vibing out. All good vibes here. It's good. So another thing that you can learn from this is that obviously it's not really going many places, but it's all about the rhythm. So you want that bass line to be the same rhythm, staccato and legato, all of the time, because that will make the groove really hypnotic. And if you can lock in with the drummer, it's going to be absolutely effortless. It's going to be perfect. Everyone's going to get up and dance, and that's obviously what we're looking for. So you can learn a lot from just a simple bass line. Our third one for today is a little bit more complicated, and it's Give Up the Funk by Parliament. And this has Bootsy Collins playing on bass, and Bootsy Collins is a little bit more of an adventurous bass player, definitely a lot more flamboyant if you know what he looks like and you know the bass he plays, but that is actually really cool, and there's loads to learn from this. So we've got muting, where we're kind of muting the string as we're bouncing into another note. It's on the one, which is a really common saying, which is like James Brown and Bootsy Collins saying it's all on the one, baby, which basically means it's on the first beat of the bar, and you need to hit that first beat dead on to lock everything together, and that is really important for funk and soul music, really, really key. So this also has this beautiful thing. Sounds really dodgy on its own, and you're basically playing 11 and 12, sliding up to 12 and 13. This is the weirdest thing in the world if you're trying to think of it as being in a scale, or you're trying to be very theoretical with this bass line. It sounds naff, but put it into the original bass line, sounds amazing. And this is actually a very common thing to do in funk. So steal that pattern and literally put it in loads of different funk bass lines. Sounds killer. So this is Give Up the Funk by Parliament, and this is the actual bass line. So you might see that I'm hitting the strings a little. I'm being a bit more percussive, and that's to kind of just keep the beat going. As long as you're not hitting the bass with your knuckles and completely breaking it, especially with a drummer, you're not really going to hear it too much. So it just kind of keeps everything pulsating, keeps you locked into the groove. And obviously there are mutes in this. If you didn't hear them, I'll show you where they are. So there's one. So I'm muting the E string, going into the 4th fret of the A string. And it's really subtle, like ba-ba. It's like I'm tripping into the notes, but that gives it a bit more bounce. The shoulders can start to work, the neck can start to bop. it just kind of keeps you nicely kind of in tune with the kick drum, with the drum kit, and the rest of the band, and that famous keyword that I keep mentioning, groove. So it definitely helps you with that. So that's our third bass line, and you should totally go and listen to all of the original songs, because some of the bass lines have effects like chorus, flanger, sometimes reverb, and it gives it a little bit more of a character. It's kind of like you're telling a story with the bass line, but if you listen to the original tracks, you'll know exactly what I mean, because you'll be able to hear it. So let's go on to number 4. So moving into number 4 for this lesson or this video, we're going to be looking at Express Yourself, which was originally written by Charles Wright, but sampled by NWA. And unfortunately, the NWA track is probably more known, so people think it was NWA that wrote the original. And this is why sampling is such a big deal, because Charles Wright obviously was the original creator of the song, but they've stole the bass line and some of the lyrics, added it obviously into their own flair, their own attitude. It's now hip-hop rather than funk, but NWA are quite a funky hip-hop group anyway. Obviously they're not going anymore, but just listen to the original track, which is Charles Wright. If you do want to listen to the NWA version, please get permission from your parents, because I don't want people hating on me via the internet, because I'm not here to annoy people. So this is obviously the bass line. Let's obviously jump into it, because I've been talking about it for a while. So this is Express Yourself. Once again, some of the notes are legato, some of the notes are staccato. Really, really popular, famous bass line, and it just sounds epic. So that one's a little bit more subtle. Some of the notes are slightly longer than the others, and this is where your subtle staccato playing comes in. You can be really cutthroat with your staccato, so it's like beh and stop really quick, and you can kind of go beh and then hold it just slightly and then cut it. And this is fine-tuning your technique, which is why it's really important to play funk bass lines in general, but this is why my top 5 incorporates all of this stuff, because if you steal all these ideas, you could be an epic funk bass player and you can write your own funk style stuff. Always good. So number 5, our grand finale for this video, is Play That Funky Music White Boy by Wild Cherry. This is kind of a bit of a weird funk track, because it's still funk, but it's starting to have elements of other music in it as well. So there's nothing wrong with blending different styles of music together, but the idea is if the bass line is super rhythmical, using 16th notes and semiquavers, and is really staccato and bouncy, then you're pretty much playing a funk bass line. There's loads of rock bands that do this, there's loads of metal bands that do this. If you're bopping and vibing and moving your head and your shoulders, it's kind of funk influenced, even if it's not funk music. So just to bear that in mind, if you don't play funk normally, you can steal these ideas and play rock, metal, jazz, whatever it is. So this is the final bass line for this lesson, or this video, and this is Play That Funky Music White Boy by Wild Cherry. So the bass line is really continuous, it's really repetitive, which once again locks you into the groove, locks you in with the drummer. Perfect. It's not actually boring because it's such a good vibe. And the first note, which is on the 1, remember, on the 1 baby, the idea is that you've got to hold this for as long as you can without obviously missing the next note. So there is a mute in there as well, but in terms of the first note, that locks everything so tightly together because it's so long, and then all the other notes are really short. So it's a massive contrast, and it basically just makes the bass line groove a little bit harder and gives it a slightly heavier vibe, but it's still super bouncy and super light. So you can mix and match your legato and staccato. I know I've been saying those words a lot, but they are super important when you're playing funk bass lines, and that was my top 5 funk bass lines that you should definitely learn. They're not super flamboyant, but they're going to lock you into the groove, and they're totally worth learning. So just to recap, we had Long Train Running by the Doobie Brothers, Super Freak by Rick James, Give Up the Funk by Parliament, which was number 3, Express Yourself by Charles Wright or NWA, and then obviously the final one was Play That Funky Music White Boy by Wild Cherry. Go and have a listen to the originals, have a listen to the grooves, lock in, have a bit of a laugh with it, and comment below with your top 5 as well, because that's what it's all about. Tell us your personal preference if you've been playing some funk bass lines. So if you found this video super useful and super helpful, remember to like, share and subscribe, drop us a comment below, and we'll see you again next time.